Five people who saved Jews during World War II. Number 5. Georg Ferdinand Duckwitz. Georg Ferdinand Duckwitz was a German member of the Nazi Party who worked as a special envoy to Nazi-occupied Denmark. Although Danish Jews were initially treated quite favorably by the Nazis, by 1943 it was planned that they would be rounded up and deported to concentration camps. His career. Duckwitz made a secret visit to neutral Sweden where he convinced Prime Minister Per Albin Hansson to allow Danish Jewish refugees to escape to Sweden. He then went to Denmark and notified Danish politician Hans Hedtoft about the deportation. Hedtoft warned senior rabbis in the country, and in the following 2 months, over 6,000 Jews were ferried secretly to Sweden in boats. After his actions, Duckwitz returned to his duties as a Nazi official, refusing to reveal what he had done in case of losing his job or worse. After the war, he continued working as West Germany's ambassador to Denmark. He died in 1973. Due to his actions, it is estimated that around 99% of Denmark's Jews survived the Holocaust. Number 4. Frank Foley. Frank Foley was a British Secret Service agent estimated to have saved 10,000 Jews from the Holocaust. In his role as passport control officer he helped thousands of Jews escape from Nazi Germany. At the 1961 trial of former ranking Nazi Adolf Eichmann, he was described as a Scarlet Pimpernel for the way he risked his own life to save Jews threatened with death by the Nazis. Despite having no diplomatic immunity and being liable to arrest at any time, Foley would bend the rules when stamping passports and issuing visas, to allow Jews to escape legally to Britain or Palestine, which was then controlled by the British. Sometimes he went further, going into internment camps to get Jews out, hiding them in his home, and helping them get forged passports. He died in 1958. Number 3. Aristides de Sousa Mendes. Aristides de Sousa Mendes was a Portuguese diplomat who ignored and defied the orders of his own government for the safety of war refugees fleeing from invading German military forces in the early years of World War II. Between the June 16 and June 23, 1940, he frantically issued Portuguese visas free of charge to over 30,000 refugees seeking to escape the Nazi terror, 12,000 of whom were Jews. De Sousa Mendes worked in the Portuguese consulate in Bordeaux, France, where despite explicit orders not to give visas to foreigners of indefinite or contested nationality, the stateless, or Jews expelled from their countries of origin, De Sousa Mendes sporadically began printing Portuguese visas illegally as early as 1939, but it wasn't until mid-June 1940, when Portugal's status was expected to change from neutral to non-belligerent, which would make Portugal more allied to Nazi Germany. Between June 16 and June 23, De Sousa Mendes began frantically issuing visas, along with his friend, the Rabbi Hein Kruger, to refugees waiting in line. De Sousa Mendes traveled to the border town of Irun on June 23, where he personally raised the gate to allow disputed passages into Spain to occur. It was at this point that Ambassador Totonio Pereira arrived at Irun, declared Sousa Mendes mentally incompetent and invalidated all further visas. An Associated Press story the next day reported that some 10,000 persons attempting to cross over into Spain were excluded because authorities no longer granted recognition to their visas. As De Sousa Mendes continued the flow of visas, dictator Salazar sent a telegram on June 24 recalling him to Portugal, an order he received upon returning to Bordeaux on June 26 but followed only slowly, not arriving in Portugal until July 8. Along the way he issued Portuguese passports to refugees now trapped in occupied France, saving them by preventing their deportation to concentration camps. After the war, De Sousa Mendes lived in destitute poverty, dying in 1954. Number 2. Dimitar Peshev. Dimitar Peshev was the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of Bulgaria and Minister of Justice during World War II. He rebelled against the pro-Nazi cabinet and prevented the deportation of Bulgaria's 48,000 Jews. Bulgaria was a strong supporter of the Holocaust, rounding up thousands of Jews in occupied Thrace and Macedonia to be deported to death camps. However, when it came to its own Jewish citizens, the government faced strong opposition from Peshev and the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. Although Peshev had been involved in various anti-Semitic legislation that had passed in Bulgaria during the early years of the war, the decision by the government to deport Bulgaria's 48,000 Jews on March 8, 1943 was too much for Peshev. After being informed of the deportation, Peshev tried several times to see Prime Minister Bogdan Filev, but the Prime Minister refused. Next, he went to see Interior Minister Peter Gabrovsky, insisting that he cancel the deportations. After much persuasion, Gabrovsky finally called the governor of Kyustendil and instructed him to stop preparations for the Jewish deportations. By 5:30 p.m. on March 9, the order had been cancelled. After the war, Peshev was charged with anti-Semitism and anti-communism by the Soviet courts, and sentenced to death. However, after outcry from the Jewish community, his sentence was commuted to 15 years imprisonment, though released after just 1 year. His deeds went unrecognized after the war, as he lived in poverty in Bulgaria. It was not until 1973 when he was awarded the title of Righteous Among the Nations. He died the same year. Number 1. Raoul Wallenberg. Raoul Wallenberg was a Swedish humanitarian who worked in Budapest, Hungary during World War II to rescue Jews from the Holocaust. Between July and December of 1944 he issued fake passports and housed several thousand Jews, saving an estimated 100,000 people from the Nazis. On July 9, 1944, Wallenberg traveled to Budapest as the first secretary to the Swedish legation in Budapest. A Swedish diplomat per anger, he issued protective passports which identified the bearers as Swedish subjects awaiting repatriation and prevented their deportation. Although not legally valid, these documents looked official and were generally accepted by German and Hungarian authorities, who sometimes were also bribed. Wallenberg rented 32 buildings in Budapest, and declared them to be extraterritorial, protected by diplomatic immunity. He put up signs such as the Swedish Library and the Swedish Research Institute on their doors and hung oversized Swedish flags on the front of the buildings to bolster the deception. The buildings eventually housed almost 10,000 people. Wallenberg started sleeping in a different house each night, to avoid being captured or killed by Aerocross party members or by Adolf Eichmann. 2 days before the Russians occupied Budapest, Wallenberg negotiated with both Eichmann and General Gerhard Schmidt-Huber, the commander of the German army in Hungary. Wallenberg bribed Aerocross party member Pals Zalai to deliver a note in which Wallenberg persuaded them to cancel a final effort to organize a death march of the remaining Jews in Budapest by threatening to have them prosecuted for war crimes once the war was over. People saved by Wallenberg include biochemist Lars Ernster, who was housed in the Swedish embassy, and Tom Lantos, the only Holocaust survivor to serve in the United States House of Representatives, who lived in one of the Swedish protective houses. After the war, Wallenberg was captured and imprisoned by the Soviets, and died in prison in 1947, though the date and circumstances of his death remain disputed.